Hello, this is Vic Hyland. I'm going to talk today a little bit about preparing pupils for exams and the situation about dealing with nerves and anticipation, sort of performance anticipation. One of the things that used to come up in the RGT seminars that I used to do about the psychology of playing and learning was the way of preparing people for exams, whether that's personally or for others. And I'd like to just sort of address a couple of those things today. There's a series of exam sessions on here at the Hadlow Centre, and I know that there's going to be people coming in saying how nervous they are. First of all, that is quite normal, but where it becomes a problem is when it starts to affect your performance. Now, there's a couple of things that I need to sort of address first of all, which are just purely to do with the psychology. And one of them is that when somebody gets very nervous, there is a tendency for their heart rate to increase, obviously. And this is not a problem because it's part of your sort of fight-flight wiring that you have. Now, the more you do things like exams or performances, the more you're able to deal with them is not the right way of expressing it, really. It's a case of they become more familiar. And part of the preparation of doing exams should be to play to people your pieces, and also to play in other places, because there is a tendency for learning patterns to become what they call state dependent. Not meaning that you're dependent on the state, but depending on the state of mind that you're in. And that can also have reference to where you practice. So if you played your pieces in another room and maybe used a mobile phone to record them, that puts you on edge a little bit, and you could sort of become very sort of familiar with that feeling. So that's very good. Obviously, if you're at school, you could play at school to the class or in an assembly or something like that. If you've got the, if you're at an age that you're able to do that. Now, I found actually that the people who suffer the most through nerves are actually adults, not children. And part of that is because of the education system, I think. We have become so rational that we have no way of actually dealing with the sort of psychological, emotional waves that we get, because the intellect has absolutely no bearing on this at all. And in fact, if it has any bearing at all, it's actually to make it worse, because there's a tendency for the intellect to just dig things up and then replay them in the mind. Whereas in actual fact, the way of dealing with things like that is to sort of basically burn it off. Children sort of run around and burn off their anxieties, play it out. We don't tend to do that as adults. So I've seen cases where people have been unable to plug their guitars in because they're so anxious, and they start to sort of shake and lose physical control over things. Now, this is something that is a real problem, and what tends to happen in those situations is that the heart rate goes up so much that we effectively increase where we are on the autism scale. We don't see the world anymore in the way that looks familiar and all this sort of thing, and our muscles start to become dysfunctional. Certainly the small muscle groups. The bigger muscle groups don't. That's why self-defense systems that are really very effective as taught to like the British commandos in the Second World War, used all of the large muscle groups. They didn't have any subtle movements. They were all to do with big, bold moves with the legs and arms. And in a strange way, this is exactly the type of thing that we go into that, because it's the fight-flight scenario, that all the subtle things in your fingers start to become difficult to do. So how we deal with this, again, part of it is what I've been saying before, become more familiar with that feeling of the building nervousness and feel of anxiety. But being more aware of your breathing, so taking some deep breaths helps. But of course, most of all, is actually having the pieces so well practiced that they are in your long-term memory. Because one of the things that really is affected by this is short-term memory stuff. So if you actually practice things and try and cram it in at the end, that's the stuff that tends to blank out. Another thing to do, and this is quite difficult because while I'm talking about this, I'm actually using words that tend to increase that feeling of unease. But when you're talking to pupils, talk to them about being relaxed instead of about them being nervous. So just say to them, if you don't feel so relaxed, just take some nice deep breaths and just play and let your fingers play the pieces. And if there's something that isn't correct, just let it go and pick it up in a positive manner and continue with the piece. Instead of saying, if you get nervous and you feel really anxious and it all goes wrong, don't panic, which is what we tend to do, obviously. So tend to be careful. If you're teaching, talk to pupils in a very positive way, using positive structured words, because for them, what actually happens is they have to open the file of them in their mind to assess what you're saying. So if you use words like panic and nervousness and stuff, they have to open that up. And if you sort of do any psychological training, and I run sort of NLP type psychological training courses to do with music. We go into those sort of things of what is the effect of using those words and what is the effect of using more positive words that actually open the file up of being confident and being effective and the music just flowing and being what you've trained yourself to do. It's a completely different outcome. Okay, so those things are also very, very important if you're using them on yourself, because positive self-talk does the same thing as if you're speaking to somebody else. And one of the things that I often say to people when they're trying to deal with themselves is that your unconscious mind is like your child. It likes to play. It likes to have fun. Anything that's too intellectual and boring, that's how you fall asleep, basically, as children do in classrooms, but as adults do when, your eyes sort of glaze over and it's like, I've had about enough of that type of thing. So there are a few sort of pointers in your sort of preparation work for going in and doing an exam and walking out feeling good about what you've done, and also being able to deal with the inevitable storms that occasionally pop up. You just let them blow over and you pick up from where you were. Okay, so I hope that's been useful for you. I'm going to be posting up quite a few things about the psychological aspect of music and performance. So, keep an eye on the channel and speak to you soon.